Hello, I'm Steph from My Driver Classic, and today I'm showing you a Citroen that you may never have seen in person or may not have even heard of, because it's certainly slipped a lot of people by. It's the Citroen LNA, or as it's known to some, the Citroen LNA. Now this car is pretty much a rebadged Peugeot 104, but to just call it that and not talk about the history, the context or anything that surrounds it does it a bit of a disservice, because it does have its place in the Citroen history. So in today's video we're going to have a look at the car, take it out, test it, talk about the historical context and where it sits in the Citroen lineup and how it performed in Europe and in the UK as well. Now I do realise that you're looking at this and thinking, Steph, I don't think that looks like any Citroen LNA or LNA that I've ever seen before. And yes, there have been some changes made. However, there are less than 5 left on the road in the UK. And I saw this one, spoke to the owner, heard the story behind it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to put that one on. So yes, it has been bumpered, the back seats have been turned into a more practical user space, and it does have a stainless exhaust alongside a couple of other little bits and pieces, but by and large we're still going to be able to get that driving experience as it would have been when Citroen sold it on the forecourt. So come on then, let's go and have a look at this rare little Citroen and find out what it's all about. In the Citroen GS video we recently put out, we discussed the Citroen Peugeot merger, and building on that, it seemed a great place to slot in the Citroen LNA. Now the story began in 1976. The LN, which predates the LNA, was launched at the Paris Salon and was then available to the buying public in 1977. However, it wasn't all of Citroen's work, like many of the other cars loved by Citroen fanatics. And it was the first car since the takeover, and Citroen fans were a little taken aback. This new car, aside from the engine, was Peugeot through and through. And what do I mean by that? Well, the body shell of the 104 was used and teamed up with the 32 brake horsepower variant of the Citroen flat twin engine. It became even more Peugeot when they introduced the LNA, which was fitted with the 50 brake horsepower 1124cc 4-cylinder Peugeot engine. So at this point, Citroen fanatics just see it as a Peugeot. Now, if you're wondering why Citroen diehards were so outraged, it's worth noting that a lot of this outrage stemmed from a promise which had been made at the point of the merger. They said that despite the two brands sitting under the same roof, they were still very much separate beasts, making their own cars. And it just seemed like at the first hurdle, the customers had been very much lied to. Now, a flimsy excuse given at the time was that the LN and the LNA served the purpose of giving the budget buyer a Citroen that they'd find attractive. But Citroen fans replied, well, is that not what cars like the 2CV, the AMI 8 do so well already? Now, they never really came back with an answer for that. But first of all, the LN was never available in the UK. We only got the LNA, which is the car that we've got today. And as I say later in the video, we only get it for a few years. We get it from 83 to 85. So it's a bit of a flash in the pan. Now the LN had done so well in France and other European countries. And so they thought that the LNA in the UK would do very well following that same ideal. And well, it just didn't hit the mark like it should have. And I talk later on about why I think that might be. And it's a real shame because it offered the budget-conscious buyer an attractive prospect with an air of simplicity. You've got decent mileage of between 49 and 60 miles per gallon, depending on the type of driving you were doing, a fairly respectable top speed on paper of 87 miles per hour, a decent enough turning circle of 29 feet, and really importantly for one of these budget cars, you also got a 6-year anti-corrosion guarantee. Citroen describe it in their sales brochure as one of the toughest babies on the market, which is a bit of weird wording, but it's how they describe it, with resin-based paintwork and an anti-corrosion schedule especially designed for the UK weather. And they even talk about thinking about salt on the roads, which when you look at other budget cars of this era that seem to fizzle away at the first bad winter, it is a rather special promise indeed. And there are other promises too, including seat compliance tuned to the car's suspension, 2-speed wipers, electric screen wash, heated rear window, brake fluid light, and the rear view mirror was also anti-dazzle. These are all big things for a budget car of the era. There were 2 models available for the UK market, if you're wondering. So you get the E and you get the RE. Now this car we're testing today is an E, which can be determined at quick glance by the lack of some of the RE extras, such as electric windows, illuminated heater controls and the quartz clock. And the RE was fitted with the same engine and gearbox as the E. So really, there was no speed advantages gained by speccing up. It was just a few extras inside the cabin. Well, and those servo brakes, because the car's 1124cc engine was paired with a 4-speed transmission unit. And by the way, if you're wondering about the automatic options, there's none of that mentioned in the brochure, so I don't know if that's something that was never available or just wasn't available for the UK market. And it had independent suspension on all 4 wheels with dual circuit brakes with drums to rear. And as I mentioned, the RE was servo assisted as standard. So all in all, a lot for the money and a bit of a missed bargain for the British public, especially in light of what the competition offered as standard. Now this is that really great period of time in automotive history where you get cars that are still very different and not so run-of-the-mill like your modern day cars, but they've got everything a modern car has, so you can use them quite regularly and enjoy them, take them down the motorway and do more than just pootling around A roads and worrying about when the next breakdown is going to happen. Now this is very, very simple inside, which you're probably expecting because remember, it is so closely related to that 104, or as some people might say, it is a rebadged 104, but there is at least one difference that we're going to spy. Now let me show you what we've got, because for me, when I was growing up, this is that era of car that people had as their first cars because they were in the back of newspapers, they were in newsagents' windows, and they were a few £100s, and so people could afford to buy them. So it brings a lot of joy back for me. So first of all, you've got this enormous space here, which you quite often see in that pre-airbag era where you can just chuck all your bits and pieces, and it has got that characteristic cracking that you see on so many of these dashes. You see it on all makes and models. I mean, if you look at things like Montegos, Maestros, it so often happens with those as well. Coming down from there, we don't have a glove box, we simply have a little mini parcel shelf. But for me, as long as there's always a little bit of storage somewhere, it's quite handy to have. Coming into the centre here, again, really simple. And do you know what? I really like a coloured plastic, and I quite like the brown against that red. It just feels a little bit retro but without feeling too aged. Now as you can see here, you've got a sizable ashtray because of course this was the era where people were still smoking and not puffing on those horrendous vapes that are things like cherry cheesecake or strawberry dream. Oh, hate it. Anyway, coming back down, you've got this lovely chunky dial here for your heater controls. And you know what? I quite often slag off plastics of this era and say, oh, they feel like they're going to break off in my hand. This might be a rebadged 104, but I tell you what, these controls are marvellous. Now coming into the centre here, if you've ever seen a 104, or I think even a Samba, you'll know that you've got the badging there that says Peugeot or Talbot. In this, they've just left that blank. They haven't done anything with it. Coming over from there, you've got the controls down into this delicious late 80s, early 90s cassette stereo. Brings back so many memories because I had stuff like this in my Metro. Now you might notice these blanking plates either side of the stereo and be wondering what they're for. Well, if you went for the top range, and I was talking about all the different levels that came into the UK, if you went for those, it wasn't as simple as this because you also got the electric windows, and that is where they were placed. But remember, as I've said in previous videos, this is also that era where when you start to go for things like electric windows and various things like electric mirrors, they go wrong, and when they go wrong, they cost money. So getting a little arm workout in with a wind down window isn't always a bad thing, and if they go wrong, you can fix them. Coming over from there, you've got a cigar lighter, and then we come in front of us, and again you've got some lovely coloured plastics, and you've got a wonderful selection of analogue gauges, and we love that because it just feels of the era. When they start mixing digital and analog, it can feel a little bit jarring. So what have we got? Well, over here you've got your heated screen button, you've got your econometer button here. Now as I understand it, when you're driving and if you press this in, I think it goes from yellowy amber up into red, and red is the kind of day where you're late for work and you're putting your foot down and you aren't driving as frugally as you might be usually, that was when it would come up red. Coming into the centre here, you've just got 2 gauges, which is great because, as I always say, the more that you have to focus on down here when you're driving, the less that you're focusing on up here. So it's got just enough to get you through. So you've got fuel gauge, selection of warning lights around the outside on the left, and on the right hand side, you have got your speedo. Now you might be thinking with that 1124cc engine, we're not going to be going very fast. However, the owner of this particular vehicle has taken it around a track before and managed to get it up to an astonishing 90 miles per hour. I imagine if there were any rattles on the car, they probably appeared magically when you were doing 90, because if it's anything like my Metro, anything above 60 and it starts getting to be a bit of a bone shaker. So as you can see, we've got some bit of speed in there, got a couple more warning lights over here, warning controls even over here, and then you've got your choke. So it's all very as you would expect. And I think this is as well a really great car that if you have never been in something old before, or you haven't for some time and you'd like to get into something like this is a really good choice because it's so simple to work out from novice stage that it's a great thing to have. Now, in terms of your controls, on the left hand side there, you've got your indicators and you've got your horn, you've got lights, and over on the right hand side here we've got the windscreen wipers. And so that is everything we have got in this little LNA, or LNA as some people would know it. And I think that that is more than sufficient for a budget motor of this era, because remember, the reason that it was so popular in France in terms of the people it was popular with was because it was at that budget price point. And I don't know about you at home, but I feel like the budget car market now is just non-existent. There are just really no cheap options at all. Everything just feels like you're going to get tied into an enormous finance deal. And it means that new car or fairly new car ownership is out of reach for so many people, when really it shouldn't be, because we have the technology and the capability there to make these cheaper cars. So why we aren't doing it, I don't know, but that's a story for another day. Now, if you're wondering what it sounds like, let's check it's in neutral. I'll get it started up for you. Oh, that sounds really good. Now, I know that this is slightly spicier than standard, but I think we're going to get a fairly good idea of what these little cars are like. Right, let's go on an adventure, shall we? Feels a bit more modern than that GS that I took out. It also feels like it's got a lot of gap and go. Look. Now the gearbox is a funny one in the clutch because I just couldn't get my head into it at first and I kept stalling it, which was quite embarrassing actually. But now that I've driven it for a few minutes, it's starting to make a little bit more sense. I love little cars like this, they're always so much fun. And they always encourage you to behave like an absolute hooligan. Now look, this drives like a lot of the small budget hot hatch cars of the era, in that it's very sprightly, very fun and joyful to drive. You're not having a luxury driving experience, but you are having jolly good fun at the time. Now I know that in the brochure it says, you know, if you don't like parking, this is the car for you. So what does that mean? Well, I jumped to it because when I sat down in this, I thought, blimey, the visibility is really good in this. And you can see all around you and you get an instant sense of how big the car is. And you immediately feel confident as a driver, and the engine feels really confident as well, because as you drive along it constantly feels like it's just got more to give, and it's almost whispering in your ear, put your foot down, because it's just got so much to it. I thought it was going to feel a little bit wheezy. I don't know what I quite expected, but I didn't expect it to feel as lively as it does, because I've never taken out a Peugeot 104, so I didn't really have anything to benchmark it against. Although I have been out in, you know, another famous Peugeot hot hatch, the 205, and I really rated that as well, and I think this is jolly good fun. Now, I was talking about mixed fortunes at the start of the video and how it went down in mainland Europe and how it went down in the UK. And here's the thing, because when this came to market, a lot of you die-hard Citroen fans were looking at this and thinking, it's not Citroen. They felt shortchanged by that Citroen Peugeot merger and what it meant for Citroen, because Citroen fanatics were so used to Citroen breaking the mold, coming up with something different and making people look twice. And they looked at this and thought, well, it's just a Peugeot, it's nothing special. We're almost outraged. But here's the thing, money talks, and what I mean by that is that this was so cheap and budget friendly that it did really, really well. However, in the UK, there was a lot of competition for this sort of section where you have a small little budget vehicle at a decent price, and it just didn't make waves in the same way that it did in France. But remember, it is also worth mentioning that I believe, and I still think it was the case at the time, that you got a much more favourable rate buying a French vehicle in France than you did something from the competition. So immediately that puts it just a little bit above some of those competitive vehicles, whereas in the UK they weren't getting that same advantage. Now, what is it like as we drive along today? Well, first of all, for a car from the early 80s, because this is an 83 issued vehicle. Remember, we only got these in the UK from 83 to 85. I think it feels quite modern and really with it. And I take out a lot of cars, and you take out stuff from the early 80s, and sometimes it just feels a little bit tired, even though it's relatively new in terms of some of the classics that we test. Whereas this, it could pass for a car that's 10 years newer, and I will give it that. And the quality of the materials that have been used for such a car that was priced so low in the market are really good as well. It feels very durable. Now, I know that some of the details have changed. These seats are out of, I think it's a Samba S that they're out of. It's definitely a Samba that it's out of. So they are slightly different, and apparently the original seats are quite fragile. And of course, being so rare, they are incredibly hard to replace or repair. So they're sitting in storage at the moment. But the durable plastics that are sitting in your high traffic areas, the steering wheel, the controls, everything feels remarkably well made for the money. But you do tend to find that with some of these Peugeots of this era, and the Citroens as well. Now, as we cruise along, I guess I've got to try and find some minuses that I don't like, and I am really struggling, because I think for the money, for where it's at in the market, we take it on that merit, and I say it does a jolly good job of serving the target audience, and for the money as well, it really hits those notes. But what would I change? I would do something with this space here. I think that it just feels like a wasted space. Either cut directly into the dash to give you some proper storage, or just level it off so that it's flat. I think that, I mean, for how many pennies it would have cost, I think it would have been nice to have something covering that area down there just to neaten it all off. And this space here feels a wasted opportunity. I feel like something could have been done with it, even just to create a stylised badge. But these are all very small complaints about a car which even now puts a smile on your face. And sometimes I'm not enamoured with this 80s stuff. It feels a little bit too modern for me. But this brings me back to life. It puts a smile on my face. It's lively, it's spirited. That 1124cc engine is giving you the oomph to bring a bit of joy back into motoring, because as we know, many of these modern cars nowadays just get you from A to B. They don't actually bring you any joy or fun to the driving experience, which is such a shame. And also, I have a soft spot for this area of the market. The small budget car, we just, as I said earlier, we just don't see it anymore. Now I'm going to return this back to the rally field. It's been jolly good fun taking you out in it today and showing you a vehicle which you may never have seen before, or perhaps you just haven't seen for a while. I wish the owner all the success with it, because we were having a chat earlier and he was telling me that he's about to spend a decent bit of money on it. He's got a project car at home and he's going to sell it and sink the money back into this. So who knows, maybe next year when we come to the Citroen Car Club Rally, we'll see it again and it will look very different indeed. I hope you've enjoyed the video, slightly more modern, but I think next week we'll be going back to something a little bit older and from yesteryear. But until then, thanks for coming with us for a drive on the LNA, and take care and drive safely.